T minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Midheaven Podcast. Thank you for joining us. My name is Candice Marie, and here is my co-host,
the Peace Dealer, and I want to make a special shout out to Alex Jones. You know, you got kicked off before the rest of us did, and we thank you for, you know, I still remember seeing you in Pierce Brosnan's show, debating guns. You're ahead of your time. That's all I'm gonna say. Thank you for joining this episode. I got the InfoWars shirt. It was a gift to me for my birthday.
It's a cool shirt.
I like it.
What does it say? May the truth be with you. Nice. Okay, it's not just me. I was like sneezing up a storm before we started filming this. I don't have COVID or anything.
We're variant virus factories. Don't listen to her. We don't listen to the rules. So we're unproductive members of society.
Well, we are unproductive members of society.
Oh yes.
No, we're not. We're like spiritual superheroes.
I don't even like to think so. I guess it's fact now. Like we've been co-signed. We're recognized.
People are trying to fucking impersonate me on the internet. I've had like
times.
3 and counting imposters that are mimicking my
I only have one
my
so
Instagram
far.
And trying to scam motherfuckers for readings. I sent a message to Mike and he was like, "You made it."
Right? She's like, "Oh, this is the 3rd time." I was like, "You made it 3 times."
Nobody wants to steal my identity. My credit score maybe, but not my identity.
I don't want that Sun Pluto smoke.
You don't want that smoke.
Even vibration.
It's funny, I always say that. I'm always like, "You don't want no smoke." People are like, "What?" I'm like, exactly.
The first person to actually, you know.
Struggling over there?
Yeah, gotta get this right. First person to impersonate my profile, I just said something nonchalant. It wasn't overreacting. All I said is that, you know, this asshole is dead. And people kind of acted like I overreacted, that someone impersonating me, scamming other people, doesn't deserve death. Like, I thought that was fair, but it is what it is. And I didn't even say is dead. I just referred to the asshole as a dead asshole, describing the quality of the asshole. So it is what it is.
The funniest thing about mine was that I didn't even know what was happening. I just like got blown up with like a ton of like DMs and then a ton of text messages and calls, like people who I haven't spoken to in like over a year, and they're like, "Somebody's trying to impersonate you," and I was just like, "Oh my god, I keep getting messages, so I'm just gonna make a post." But what's fucking hilarious to me, 2 things. One is that this person is stupid enough to literally in the profile put host of the Midheaven Podcast, and they put the @ right, so it's like, of course we're gonna see that. Right. You're a fucking idiot. You're probably a Nigerian scammer, but whatever. And
hey,
2,
we're pretty good though. We're much better than this.
No, this was not smooth. It was that, God. And then they went as far as like asking people like, "Yeah, like let me get your Zelle or your PayPal. Like you can Zelle or PayPal me," and then they exchanged their phone number. So I've got like clients being like telling this guy off, which is hilarious. They're sending me screenshots and telling this person off. The real number? Yeah, they just said like, "Okay, you can get a text reading." I'm like, "What? I don't give text readings." And then 2, you can also get a phone reading or a video reading. I'm like, how the fuck is this person gonna do a video reading unless they're just taking the money and scamming people? Like, I'm impressed. Like, I straight up texted this person and was like, "Hey, Candice, let me get a reading." And that person blocked me because, of course, you know, they got onto it. But all my clients were like telling this guy off, and like they're going and like commenting like on the profile and being like karma's gonna get you. And I'm just like, this is kind of hilarious all these people are coming for this person, but yeah, check those profile, kids. Like, make sure that you check the
even
spelling
more
and
hilarious
everything.
for the people who fall for it. Like, the spelling is off. They're asking you for a reading. You deserve it. I'm just say, you deserve it. Like learn from that lesson
as
too.
readers, like, we're not gonna like approach you and be like, "Oh, do you want me to give you a reading? Like, I have a message for spirit from you." Like, this ain't no some fucking like Long Island medium shit. Like, we're not gonna approach you and tell you that like, you know, your dead grandma has a message for you. Like, that's some day one shit. Like, you don't, like, unless people come to you and they ask you for something, you don't. I mean, unless you buy me a few drinks and I want to tell you your future. That's different.
At least look to see if the regular profile you're already following is still active.
Yeah, and I don't have a backup or anything either, so it's just kind of like, that's the only one.
Right.
It's so appropriate to be talking about this because this episode is one of something that people have asked about for a little while. It's an evergreen episode for us. We want to talk to you guys a little bit about natal retrograde planets in the birth chart.
I have Pluto retrograde, I have Neptune retrograde, I have Uranus retrograde, I have Saturn retrograde, and that's it. Just those 4.
That's the big ones, though.
I don't think I have Jupiter, just those 4. And then everything else is direct for me.
I wonder what it's like to be God's favorite and not have any retrograde planets in your natal chart.
I
wonder what that's like.
I feel like all direct planets could be its own turmoil. I think some retrograde planets are, like Saturn retrograde is pretty sweet, I'm not gonna lie. But then again, maybe...
You don't see that as like possibly like a delay, depending on the aspects. You don't see that as a delay of...
It depends, like if it's in its fall, it might be, but if it's in its dignity, right? I've kind of seen Saturn retrograde to be like, the work is pre-planned for you, right?
That's interesting, that perspective.
Right, instead of having to like do the work, get the karma, it's like, okay, well, your karma is to just do all this work. And that's been my experience, like, but I feel it's different because I'm very connected with Saturn, so
yeah,
it might be different for other people, but yeah, the retrograde I've come to enjoy actually because it almost reverses the process.
I could see that with some of like the heavy hitters,
Yeah.
you know, in the chart. All my planets are direct except for Jupiter, which is in my 10th.
You only have Jupiter retrograde.
I only have Jupiter retrograde.
That's interesting.
Yeah, but Jupiter in my 10th still like shows up, right? Like I feel like I'm very like Jupiterian in like my work and my titties. So
I believe from what Lada said, that makes sense. I believe.
What? It's true. Jupiter in Cancer.
Cancer is, of course, that makes sense. Oh, I'm about to.
Yeah. I got a moon face and a nice rack.
I'm gonna do like a case study on that, like Jupiter Cancer ladies, but like versus other Jupiter like ladies. But other than that, for science, strictly for science.
Jupiter and Sag though, don't sleep on that ass.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Sag
Oh
Jupiter.
my God. Yes.
Yeah. Ass and thighs.
Oh my gosh, I love Sagittarius for that reason. Yes.
He's like, wait, what were we talking about?
What were you talking about?
Back to retrograde planets.
So like, yeah.
You say Lada was gonna say?
I remember hearing this only from Lada, and it really gave me such a, shout out to Lada, she's an OG, but it gave me such a really good insight on how to understand retrogrades. Retrogrades, of course, the planets don't actually move backwards. They just kind of give the illusion or semblance that they are. But basically the explanation she said was that when they're direct, and this is a paraphrase, but it's almost as if like there's filtering from the sun between the planet, the sun, and the earth, and then when they're retrograde, it's just the planet directly to the earth or to the sun.
Interesting because it's kind of like counter to when we explain it.
Right.
Right? Because so for those of you guys who are not aware, like maybe you've heard like retrograde or like Mercury retrograde, and like people freak out about it, but a retrograde is from Earth's perspective that the planet is actually going backwards, when in reality the actual orbit of the planet is actually slowing down. So because the Earth is going so fast, from our perspective it's going backwards, right? And so all planets except for the moon and the sun retrograde. They all have a retrograde cycle.
Oh my God, if the moon retrograded, we'd all be fucked.
Right? The oceans would be a mess.
Yeah.
Cancers would just not exist.
Oh my God.
Cancers are having a hard enough time as it is.
Oh yes.
But yeah, so from our perspective, it's going backwards. So us little like mortals on this planet freak out, right? Especially if it's an inner planet like Mercury or Mars or Venus, right? When it retrogrades,
It's more noticeable.
It's more noticeable because it's closer to the Earth, so it affects us more, but it's also closer to the sun. So the outer planet retrogrades, like Uranus, Neptune, Saturn, Pluto, those retrogrades last longer. So you can see a retrograde through transit, like, okay guys, Mercury is going retrograde at the end of September, or Venus is going retrograde at the end of December. But in a natal chart, you can have a natal planet retrograde.
Mm-hmm. And transit retrogrades and natal retrogrades are definitely different for a while, because natal retrogrades do have a meaning, right? But when people ask me what natal retrogrades are, because it's not a transit and because we're only looking at like a snapshot at a time of where that was, I always advise people to treat it like it's a direct planet if we're just looking at the actual energy. But when we look at the transit, because that's real time, we can introduce it. Now, there is a natal meaning for the retrograde, right? Other than the direct. So I don't want to discount that. But sometimes people, one misconception is people will give the attitude that it's so different. Like, oh, well, this is retrograde, so that changes everything.
It's more internal.
It's more internal.
It's more
right.
internal. Okay, because I was going to say, like, I've never heard the perspective that if it's retrograde, we look at it as like unfiltered. Like, that's interesting because even I've never heard that.
And I want to paraphrase, because it's not like she said it's unfiltered, but basically what she was saying is like the rays that block the pureness of the energy during its direct, it's not there anymore.
Yeah. That makes sense also because the planet kind of being like smushed in between, aspects of like the Earth, which is like that reality, and then the sun, which is just like highlighting it. But I mean, maybe from my perspective, just like a natal planet retrograde is just the need to review, revise, rework. I see it as karmic. So almost like similar, especially if there's aspects, to or from the south node. But I see a retrograde planet as more karmic in a sense of like, okay, it's retrograde, you're having to work 3 times harder to achieve the benefit of that planet. Mm-hmm. But oftentimes, because of that internal work and because you're so intensely internally worked on that, it may be harder to kind of get that out into the world or have that be something that's like more apparent. So I personally don't feel like there's such a thing as like a good or a bad placement.
Exactly.
It's all about what you make of it. Now, are there going to be people who are going to be more predisposed to certain things because a planet is retrograde? Absolutely. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. Like, I've focused a lot on, at least like the last 2 years, working with a lot of clients who want me to analyze their kids' chart. And I think part of that, it's my North Node in the 5th and just my transits with the 5th, that I know that like a large part of my work is going to be about like creative stuff, but also like younger people or children.
Right.
And I love analyzing kids' charts. And so what I've done for the last couple of years with friends of mine who have had kids who are either newborns or all the way to like 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, analyzing the charts and talking to the parents about, what issues they're having. And like, I don't have kids. Like, I don't know anything about raising kids. I'm the oldest, but I can look at a chart and see. Yeah.
Same here.
Awesome.
First of 3.
Well, I think that it gives us the opportunity to like look at a kid's chart and kind of see like, well, what are they more predisposed to?
And especially since it's in our time, so we're familiar with the retrograde too, which I love that you mentioned that, because especially how she mentioned that not everything is good or bad. Not every retrograde is the same. So like you can't apply the same Mercury retrograde definition to when it's in another sign. And you can't just take the retrograde natally, especially, for face value, because you have to take the lesson of that natal retrograde in relation to other aspects.
And it depends on the sign that it's retrograde in. It depends on the house. I mean, obviously, like a Mercury retrograde in Gemini or Virgo, I could see is like sometimes a lot more positive because it's reworking already that zone that's very mercurial, versus like, if there were to be a Mercury retrograde in Sag, which already it's kind of struggling because it's in Sagittarius, and then it's retrograde on top of that, or maybe it was in, Pisces. So you have to take into consideration aspects in the sign, but and we're going to go through planet by planet and kind of talk about our 2 cents, but just kind of to kick this off, a retrograde is an opportunity to revisit something. So in transit, it's like cleaning out the fridge, right? You have to do it. If you don't do it, like there's going to be a problem. Something's going to stink, and you have to clear things out during a retrograde. So it's about revisiting, reviewing, revising. I'm a big fan of retrogrades in general because I feel like there's something very karmic about it, and that's why I believe that in a natal chart, a retrograde planet is very karmic, because I've seen time and time and time again with my life and also many of my clients, with any retrograde, there's something that comes back up to review. Maybe I see it more with like a Mars retrograde or a Venus retrograde. I see a lot of karmic stuff. I see a lot of that also with like Saturn. You know, they say like you're doing the good work when Saturn's direct, but then when Saturn retrogrades, it's like he comes back and he's gonna like check you and make sure you're doing your Saturn work. So because I've seen enough of that shit happen in transit with clients' charts, it makes me so much more interested in a natal planet that's retrograde.
Right, and once again, like I'm really in the belief that like a retrograde transit is not the same as a natal retrograde.
Yeah.
Right, like the transit's real time, and then the natal is a part of a story, so or like a life epic. So yeah, I mean, and our understanding of retrogrades too, moving forward, is just going to innovate, because for the first time ever, we have logged data.
Yeah.
So we have the ability to look back 30 years and really extensively research, because we don't have research institutions like medicine and law does. But that's going to change. So like we'll be able to really...
It's definitely shifting. I mean, there's quite a few databases and things that are online pertaining to like, you know, transits and also just like the ephemeris of all kinds of different planets and asteroids and other things. But I don't know. I feel like enough people have asked about this, that it's important. Another topic we were talking about that we're going to come and talk about soon also probably is going to be stelliums. We'll talk about that as well. But let's stick to the topic of retrograde planets. So you guys know now a little bit of like our perspective on retrograde planets, the difference between a transit and also having it natally, and that maybe natally it's this overarching theme pertaining to that planet that you're constantly reviewing and reworking, and might be dealing with some karma. So let's talk about the planets in retrogrades and what that may mean. So we'll start with like what, like Mercury, Mars, Venus?
Let's do it, the inner planets. So the inner planets going retrograde, Mercury, Venus, Mars pertains to, of course, your brain, Mercury, your heart, Venus, and your sense of pleasure, and sex and your desire with Mars.
Passion, courage.
Right. Passion, courage. So these are all personal because they have everything to do with our body, our personality, instead of like outside influences or cultural influences. So these retrogrades will come into huge reevaluations of, like we'll see at the end of the year with Venus, the way you love, the way you think. Mercury retrograde, of course, I'm very connected to Mercury. Very, very important. And with Mars too, changing action like we had in Aries 2020. So one thing that really fascinates me about astrology is the intuitive language that the planets make with each other and how things just sequence so perfectly. And Mercury and the sun's relationship evidence that, where like the sun is your conscious awareness, but Mercury is your brain's ability to process information. And so if Mercury didn't go retrograde, then Mercury moves so fast. If you notice, you can't be born with Mercury more than a sign away or behind. So if like we didn't retrograde, you would process and analyze information far beyond you're aware of it. You'll be talking about stuff, you'll be picking up information that's going to happen 6 months from now without the ability to process what realistically what you're doing. And so we go so far, and then we start to reevaluate the information we've analyzed while the awareness comes through, come into epiphany. Then Mercury starts to go behind the sun, and we start to analyze and process retroactively as we're aware before we process. Then it goes direct, catches up with the sun, and then we come into epiphany of everything that through the shadow period.
With the Sun-Mercury conjunction?
Sun-Mercury conjunction. Like after it meets the first time retrograding, then we come back to the brain processing before we are aware of it, which is fascinating to me.
I like that Kazemi aspect too.
It's so awesome.
I really like I'm born with the Sun Kazemi. I think It's really interesting because it's like this highlighter of awareness, right? Like when Mercury is just within minutes, kind of ahead of the sun, right? It's like Mercury's like, wait a second, there's this thing, and I'm bringing it back to you, and then the sun's like, whoa, I didn't see that coming. But that conjunction is something that I really like fancy, right, during the retrograde aspect, awesome. Because it's this awareness of something that we weren't aware of. It's the connection between the heart and the mind. But to have like Mercury retrograde, for example, which happens every 3, sometimes 4 times a year, depending on the cycle, about 3 weeks, Mercury goes retrograde, so everything that Mercury rules gets a little funky, right? So we think of like, signing contracts, leases, issues with computers. Like there's a reason why when Mercury's getting ready to go retrograde, a lot of astrologers go, check your oil, back up your hard drive, like, be careful, don't be texting and driving, like don't be dropping your electronics, because when Mercury is going retrograde, especially, shadow, pre and post, you oftentimes see that Mercury starts kind of coming through in like really strange and unusual ways, and things kind of go haywire.
Yeah.
And it depends on the sign also. It's like this last Mercury retrograde that we had in Gemini, there was a lot of car accidents, right? There was a lot of like, people's emails glitches. Getting hacked, lots of, computer glitches, the squares to Neptune, a lot of people dropped their phone in water. A lot of these things are very predictable depending on the signs that they're in and the aspects that it makes during that retrograde. But in a natal chart, I kind of look at it 2 ways. Like I have seen, at least in my experience, some of the more real prominent, self-aware, really well-spoken, well-versed, intelligent people I've seen have Mercury retrograde.
Wow. And
a lot of it is just there's like this internal chatter, right? There's like this chit-chat and like really profound thinking and reviewing and reworking something. Is it harder for them to like get their work out or express how they feel, talk about their feelings, publish that book? Do some of them have challenges or maybe even learning disabilities, or do they learn differently? I think back to like recently, my best friend's got 3 daughters and they're all very adorable. But one definitely has like a Mercury retrograde in her chart, square Neptune. And I remember looking at the chart being like, I'm like, do you have like TVs and things on? She's like, well, yeah, we live in like a 2-bedroom apartment. I'm like, well, the kid can't be, studying or anything if there's screens and noise, sound, Neptune in the background. And I said, she has to literally, be in another room. Like you got to put her in another room. She's like, that's so funny because we recognize that she can't pay attention when that's going on. And like, we're looking into like getting her like some noise proof headphones.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Right. And then when you start to actually work with those kids and like realize that having them sometimes study in a silent environment, or maybe they need that one-on-one with a tutor because they don't learn the same way in like in a classroom setting. It really makes us like kind of realize like, do we have a lot of kids that have been misdiagnosed for ADHD when in reality they just learn differently, and some might be better audio, some might be better visual. It's just, I don't know, it's very fascinating to me.
No, that's very true. And shout out to KRS Astrology. I remember, I'm thinking it's from him, but he mentioned an insight about how, given the reevaluative nature of retrogrades, and especially Mercury, the Mercury retrograde in the natal chart, normally that native is going to, like, I'll think of something and say it, but the Mercury retrograde is going to think about it again, think about it. Right. Did I say it right? And I want to see if it's correlated to stuttering. I doubt it, but like, yeah, just like going over it so much so that by the time you say it, it's probably perfected. Yeah. It's probably more eloquent.
It's like that internal chatter.
But they may be more unsure of themselves than Mercury directs.
It's possible because you have to work harder to express any retrograde energy. But I feel like Mercury retrograde's probably one of the most common retrogrades that you're going to see, just because that planet retrogrades more often than any of the other planets. But also they're faster. So I guess we could say to some extent generationally it's a little different for us because people, who were born in like the late 80s, early 90s, they have those conjunctions, and some of the planets are retrograde. So if you have stelliums in your chart and if there's retrogrades, that's going to pack a punch. But I just feel like because Mercury is retrograde more frequently, maybe it might be more, I don't know. Maybe not, because there's some long retrograde cycles for some of the other planets. Maybe it's a wash. I have to look at it and see.
Yeah. And I mean, even Venus and Mars aren't as long as the others, but they are pretty long.
And I feel like a Mars or a Venus retrograde in a natal chart is a lot more potent.
Oh yeah, and a lot more difficult
a lot more challenging. Okay, so let's talk about that. So just kind of in closing, like Mercury being information, learning, reading, communicating, speaking, typing, texting, things that deal with like vehicles or electronics, things like that. So if it's retrograde, there may be more challenges in that area of life depending on the sign and the placement. But Venus,
giving and receiving love. I almost feel like the retrograde can bring challenges in receiving pleasure, and also just changing one's mind around their value. And it doesn't have to be changing one's mind, but just constantly adjusting, okay, I'm worth this, but I'm worth this. Or no, now I'm worth this. But let me not say it like that, because it doesn't always have to be finicky too. But several things. I know for the transit, like the retrograde will, like, similar with Mercury retrograde, I noticed, bring in soulmates, bring in, of course, as Mercury brings in like old people you haven't spoken to. Venus is going to do this more directly with connections, mainly to resolve them too. And
that's the whole point, is to like clean stuff up, right? Especially if it's been like mentally static. Like I've seen a lot of times with people who are thinking about something, and then, you know, Mercury retrogrades, and then they hear from that person, right? Because it's like, you know, the wires are kind of like finally connecting during the retrograde, so you can clear it out. I don't know, with like a Venus retrograde, at least natally, I've seen it vary very much from like men and women. I don't know if you've noticed that, but, you know, across the board, I feel like it's safe to, I feel comfortable saying I've heard enough clients kind of feel like they're jinxed in love. And when I think of like a woman who has Venus in retrograde, depending on the sign, but it kind of just reminds me of like one of the members of like Hole, right? Like very like Courtney Love, like kind of bad girl, like pushing the envelope, very Lilith, like this very raw, unfiltered version of Venus, kind of like a bad girl. But some of these women really aren't, and they may challenge the idea of like what is feminine, and reworking and kind of pushing against what is feminine. And then for men, I've seen a lot of like those men not really fully understanding women or how women work, or are having a hard time relating. But regardless of the gender, I've seen definitely a lot of just people kind of being like not knowing how to practice really good self-love. And then in turn having a lot of like relationship dynamic issues, and like not understanding why relationships don't work.
Right.
And a lot of that being kind of connected to Venus being retrograde, and like this need to practice the internal love, and like to kind of shift that and flip it outward, so that way you can actually be able to connect and experience pleasure, or shared values, or whatever. I don't know. Men with Venus in retrograde, that's a definitely a more challenging placement.
Yeah, and accepting femininity, like you said, and also, you know, on the flip side, this can make one notice patterns in relationships, maybe perhaps more easy, because they're so stuck on it on their own. And this over time just adds like that level of training. It can add a certain sensitivity to discern people's intent. Whereas the direct person might be just so focused, or maybe nonchalant on how they direct their energy, like a take it or leave it. The retrograde, by the time it's expressed, is already like evaluated in mere moments what it is they're balancing, and still may feel insecure about it. I mean, it doesn't have to be insecure, but
it just feels very stunted to me. Like it just, the energy feels very stunted,
or not properly expressed because there's no outlet or place.
Not understanding why one, you know, can't connect to other people. Like that seems to be the reoccurring theme. You know, like men that I've talked to or spoken with and dealt with that are just like, I just don't understand. Like what's wrong, and they don't always understand like how to finesse. And then like women kind of like pushing like against, like I said, the idea of like what is beautiful or attractive, or, you know, what is feminine, and in some of the best ways. Like, you know, I think of, you know, like celebrities and stuff that I know that have it. Like one of my favorite Venus retrograde male celebrities would be like Jack Nicholson, like, you know, that Venus retrograde that he has in Aries, and you just look at everything about him where he's just kind of a little rough and tumble, and just like a little like devious and a little aggressive, Yeah, so that's an interesting one. But then there's like people also who are like, you know, Amy Winehouse. She had the Venus retrograde, I believe, in Leo, and Mars is in Leo too. So that makes sense, right? She's like this like really rebellious, like kind of like femme fatale, but like rock and roll like woman. Yeah, I know, it's interesting. And then Mars being about courage and vitality, passion, energy, masculinity. What else? What am I missing? The fight.
Not only just the fight, but also the drive and the inspiration and the willpower. So, you know, Mars retrograde, definitely in the transit, I like to see it as like changing the direction. Like we were going here, but okay, maybe I was going here for the wrong reasons. I should, now that I've desired this for so long, now I want to desire this. And it doesn't have to be a change in direction, maybe in a cardinal sign, but
maybe it's more challenging just to get that energy moving. Like when I think of Mars retrograde, I think of like having the foot on the brake or having your car in park but revving the gas, right? Because it's like, okay, I'm ready to go, here I'm going, and I'm not going anywhere, or I'm actually, you know, like I'm in reverse, like changing course. That's a really good way to look at it. But there can be lack of motivation or lack of consistency or lack of passion or even challenges with like, you know, sex and intimacy depending on the aspects. I find a Mars retrograde quite frustrating. I'm very Mars kind of based though, my placements, but I find Mars retrogrades incredibly agitating because I just want to go, you know?
Mars is a decider of autonomy too, even if you cooperate with others. So we're seeing a lot of reevaluating direction and desire, and also, you know, Venus's femininity, it's redefining masculinity too.
Could it be like holding back and withholding anger or rage, misplaced
or displaced
anger.
or misplaced anger?
Yeah.
And maybe accessing suppressed anger and having to deal with it because now you're not too busy. That's what I feel with the direct. It's like you're so busy doing it that the retrograde now, oh, this is what I've done. Like, this is what's happened. So, yeah. But, I mean, Mars retrograde, though, especially in the natal, in some cases can make for probably great sex or great, you know, ability to, with the mind-body connection, act off of what's happening just because of, like, maybe even with Uranus contacts, an unconventionality in the way you do it. So Mars retrogrades can also deal with doing things differently. Not like in the Uranian sense where it's out the norm, but like...
just not as masculine, more sensitive or emotional or receptive, rather than aggressive and like penetrative. Like maybe it's like very like Art of War when you think about it. It's instead of going about it directly, it's like kind of like choosing and picking your battles.
Kind of like if it was in Virgo or Scorpio, like a strategic Mars.
Yeah, I could see that.
It's just difficult because the retrograde is going to be different for everybody.
Yeah, it depends on the sign and then the house and the aspect. So this is like very general. But I could also see that like be something like I've had a number of clients who've had Mars retrograde, and there was definitely some aspect of like, you know, not always having the motivation to be active or not always wanting to pursue people sexually. But most of what I've seen is actually people who have had issues with inflammation in the body, you know, like that suppressed heat, right? And like having like rash stuff and like skin stuff, or, you know, rosacea, or like constant like flare-ups of like fibromyalgia and like other things. Yeah.
Maybe even obsessive compulsion too. And a lot of this can be unconscious if it's the 12th house to the sun. Once again, like it's going to depend on the sign in the house, but that a lot of Mars, Venus, Mercury retrograde is getting ready to like change your mind, your heart, or your desire around things. If it's in a cardinal sign, the direction of it. If it's in a fixed sign, the quality of it. If it's in a mutable sign, the perception of it.
Yeah, that's a good perspective, especially like knowing the difference between those. So then we move to like the outer planets, Saturn.
The good stuff.
Saturn and Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto.
Which all, we know Saturn rules Capricorn, Neptune rules Pisces, Uranus rules Aquarius, and Jupiter rules Sagittarius. So the reason why that's important is, unlike the personal planets, all 4 of those signs rule collective zodiac signs. So all of those outer planets, especially retrograde, are going to deal with everybody.
Yeah.
It's more contextual. It's not as personal to you. So these retrogrades are going to bring like changes in structures around you, changes in your own work ethic. If we start with Saturn, right? Saturn is, of course, the taskmaster, and it's karma. So, you know, the direct motion of Saturn is, of course, if you want to know authority figures and whatever governments are enforcing, the retrograde is going to see a reevaluation of those enforcements, and people really combing and criticizing what has been enforced. I like to see it as how effective are these laws we're enforcing? Do we have to tweak it? And then in your career, Saturn retrograde is going to be really great so that you can reevaluate what needs to change in your career, or what direction you need to go in your career, what is out of integrity based on what happened, because something that worked during the direct may not work in retrograde, and the retrograde will prepare you for a different cycle of change.
And responsibility.
You
know, a lot of what I've seen, I think, I mean, I can go either way. It depends on the aspects. I don't want to make too general of like statements, but I have seen them in some situations, especially when it's like a Mars retrograde in the first house. Not Mars, excuse me, Saturn. Saturn retrograde in the first house. Sometimes I've seen it like manifest as like somebody's like stunted inability to like really mature, or like, you know, take responsibility or take care of themselves, right? And so it can kind of take on that vibe. Why does this sound familiar? It can. I have that in my chart. You know, and I've seen this mostly, like I said, with clients, just having looked at dozens and dozens and dozens, especially people who have Saturn in Capricorn, because like I'm constantly looking at those charts, kind of like thinking like, you know, how are these people or our people like different than a lot of the other generations? But across the board, it doesn't really matter the sign. But
you saying that now gave me the impression that like Saturn direct people are always hustling on the go, like they're ready to take care of like responsibilities, versus the Saturn retrograde. There's just not a drive to. And
maybe they're just more acutely aware, the direct, that there is a responsibility, but the Saturn retrograde is like how do I take control, or how can I manage, or how can I overcome?
Or you let it happen to you, and then through that you come into that, as opposed to the direct that's like, okay, I'm going to do this, and then, you know, to find out in the moment, versus the retrograde that might struggle to find out how, and then once they're in that situation, that's how they find out. I feel like that could be like a subtle difference, but yeah. I love what you're saying about that, because I resonate so much, especially as a Gemini. Like, just,
and that's not me talking down. I'm just saying I've seen that. You know, yeah. I've got my own issues with Saturn, but I think something that we forgot also was Jupiter. How can we forget Jupiter? Did we forget Jupiter? So we talked a little bit about Saturn. So Jupiter being like the biggest planet, aside from the sun, which is a star in our solar system, abundance, growth, joy, optimism, knowledge, philosophy.
Wrecking ball.
Yeah. So, you know, Jupiter, I feel like, whether it's retrograde or it's direct, to some extent, you know, the Jupiter retrograde can be positive because it really reins Jupiter in, and it can be like a lot of inner knowledge and information, or not overly blowing things out of proportion. Jupiter retrograde, maybe having spent many lifetimes sharing the information, sharing the knowledge, so carrying that over, using it more on like an inner like integrity kind of level, right? Or like a taking the higher moral ground in situations. You might feel like it's like a limit in expansion or success. You might be more frustrated. People who have it retrograde might feel like, you know, I don't see all of the goodies that other people have when it's direct and it's more obvious.
Right. It's like an octave of Neptune, but where both of those retrograde will almost take away the faith, just so...
Yeah, I could see that.
Right? Whatever you were abundant on, now Jupiter retrograde wants to see, okay, do you really believe it? And then when it goes direct again, it's like, okay, I do have this abundance, versus...
Do you have Jupiter retrograde in your chart?
Direct.
You have yours direct. Is it in Cancer?
On Chiron.
Oh, okay. Yeah, mine's conjunct, so...
Retrograde, though.
Retrograde, yeah. My Jupiter's retrograde, which is funny, because, like, mine's in the 10th house, you know? And it's like, I'm constantly having this like battle and this conversation with myself. Like my progressed sun is in Sag, so like I kind of ride the line between like I want to work and like I just want to travel.
So that means it was in Leo and then it went back to Cancer.
Yeah, mine's at 10. It's an exact opposition to Saturn and Neptune.
Oh wow.
So like my Cancer is my Jupiter is constantly in check in multiple ways, but like because it's retrograde, I'm always like, oh my gosh, like I need to do more, I need to work more, I need to get out there more, I need to share more.
I take that back. I asked you the wrong question because I forgot you're born in 89.
Yeah,
90.
I'm old.
So yeah. That was only just went in. That's what's up.
But yeah, it was retrograde. So I'm like, I don't see it. But a lot of other people are like, you're doing great, like you're getting out there. And
that's real. I'm glad you said that too, right? Like to other people to look like you're
a lot of other people are like, you're so successful, and I'm just like, I'm just kind of fucking around. Like I don't know.
That's what I feel with Saturn.
You know?
That's what I feel with Saturn.
Then I think about like when I had a normal job, like every job that I've ever gone out for, like any interview I've ever done, like I've always gotten the job. Wow. Like I've always had a job, always in the 10th house, and it's always been about like sharing, teaching, like whatever, you know, baking, whatever. But yeah, so it's interesting. I think that maybe you just don't feel as much sweetness, but there can be a lot of internal knowing, knowledge, belief.
Which is even deeper in the 10th house where outside looking in, other people's reputation will see it. Yeah. But it might be difficult to like.
Yeah. Well, it's good. It keeps me like super grounded, right? Like I'm not going to have like a big head. Yeah. You know? Like I think that's the positive thing. And then we talked a little bit about Saturn, so we can talk about Uranus.
Uranus. So that is very interesting. I know I got transit Uranus on my Venus right now. It's going to retrograde, so I'm going to be interested in that. I mean, just examining the retrogrades that have happened before. And Uranus and Pluto are just so, and Neptune are so trans-Saturn. So everything we spoke about now was every planet that's before Saturn. So the rest of these planets are trans-Saturnian after Saturn, outside of civilization, because Saturn is like the boundaries of what's considered normal or acceptable with Venus or lawful. Uranus is the outcast, Aquarius, right? The outsider, the weirdo. Neptune is the escapist, the strange one. And Pluto, of course, is like the
Hades.
Right, the Hades, right? The not even in this realm. So, you know, the unconscious. So these are a bit different because now you're not going to actually notice these. You are going to notice these, but you're only going to notice a small percentage because these are extra dimensional energies. And so you're experiencing the retrograde and the direct motion of these planets in ways that are quantum, subatomic, and like out of this world. So, you know, everything we're going to tell you is maybe like the tip of the iceberg, but keep that in mind. Like it's incorporating so much of a deeper collective essence. And with Uranus, you know, the innovations that we're coming into, which because it moves so slowly, it's going to be super subtle. It's not going to be until like after the fact you realize, oh, that's what really happened.
Yeah, it takes a long time. Even in transits, when we're dealing with like, you know, retrogrades of these planets, it can be months of dealing with those retrogrades, which takes long, kind of like this like alchemical thing that kind of happens where it really kind of seeps in, and then you start to see the changes. So, and they're each going to have like their own flavor, right? So like the Uranus retrograde, I see it as like, you know, well, what is Uranus? It's electrifying. It's intense. It's sudden. It's sparks of intuition. It's rebellion. It's all kinds of things that challenge like the system. So for that to be going on, retrograde can feel like this like internal restlessness, this internal rebellion, this back and forth, this need, this more of a need to feel like you need to break free than when it's direct.
Yes, I mean, I'm glad you said, especially when like Pluto transits over Uranus, because I have Uranus retrograde in my chart, that's really what I felt. That was around that time when that happened around that time for me, I was still living in my mom's house. And it was like, I need to be in my own space where I can read cards and do astrology without, you know, her feeling a certain way about it. And that's what actually led to me coming into more independence, just with that restless need. One of the transits, at least. So I can definitely attest to that. Like,
yeah, but it's also maybe the unwillingness or the reluctance to fly your freak flag.
Interesting.
Could be that as well.
Or resistance to do that too.
Yeah. Or like, you know, kind of like keeping that contained.
Which is something I've struggled with my whole life. Like just, because I have Saturn there too, so just limiting and like holding it back in Capricorn. So
maybe in a past life with that Uranus retrograde was like, you know, not going against the grain, like, you know, following the crowd.
Wanting to, but not
doing it.
Yeah.
And so it's like this hesitation and like wanting to break out and break free. Like it might be harder for these people to like get the mohawk or like quit the 9-to-5.
Or get the tattoo. And
yeah.
I'm not going to lie, like Uranus retrograde is 8 degrees exactly square my 8 degrees Mars in Aries. And hesitation is like, either like I hesitate and I don't take action, or I take action in the most retarded, like off-time way ever, and it's just awkward and weird as hell, and it's just like.
So what you're really saying is you want to go and get a tattoo? Is that what you're telling me?
I mean, I would.
That's what we should do. Mike and Candace get a tattoo. We'll get each other's names tattooed on our butt cheeks.
Oh.
That's what we should do. We should get a Saturn tattoo.
Only reason why I haven't gotten a tattoo is I don't know what to get, and I don't want to regret, like, oh, I shouldn't have got this.
We should go and get some planetary tattoos together. We can be like Power Rangers.
I guess. Mercury! I might put like Mercury or element symbol on my hand. I see some people get the infinities. But.
That's crazy. That's gotta hurt to get your hands tattooed.
See, I forgot about that, and it hurts dick.
Yeah,
I mean, it hurts.
It hurts. There's places where it's very sensitive, and that would probably be your hands, your feet, your elbows,
your eyeballs. Yeah.
I don't know.
People be doing that. Eyeballs, private parts. It's just like, where's your Pluto? But it is what it is.
Where's your Pluto?
Right. Oh, that sounds like a tagline. Welcome to Hades Mutual. Where's your Pluto?
That's fucking hilarious.
Skit coming soon. Are you tired of this world? You just want to come to the underworld.
It's like your passport says I've been to hell. Me too.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
is this your first time?
Is this your first time? No, just stopping, just coming through.
Oh my god.
Okay, so we got Uranus, so that leaves us with Neptune and also Pluto.
Which is going retrograde now. Neptune retrograde is definitely reevaluating this aspect and essence of all the, and Neptune is one of those planets like Pluto that I'll never understand. Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, I'll come into the most knowledge of it and still walk away more confused. Neptune especially, and I love that. I've come to appreciate that. The Geminis used to hate that, but now the Capricorn is like appreciating it. Even the Gemini is looking up to it. It's just like, okay, like a mystery is a mystery, right? Like it's not, if it's no longer mysterious, where did the dream go? So Neptune is, I've noticed in the retrograde,
I think it's more difficult.
It's really?
I think it's more difficult, yeah.
I was
go ahead and hear what you have to say. I think it's more difficult, though.
I'm glad you said, I was going to say it'll diffuse illusions, but if anything, it might create more confusion because...
That's what it's doing now.
You're right, the direct was illusory. In fact, if anything, I've noticed, though, with the direct, more of the illusions were being exposed. And then once it went retrograde, it was kind of a pause period.
You can't tell what's... It's harder to kind of sift through that and determine like what's fact and what's fantasy.
Yeah.
A lot of it depends on the placement, but I definitely
that's mutable,
see that.
How both can happen too.
And how it can be changeable. But I feel like Neptune, when it's retrograde, is a lot of like still trying to like dissolve certain things that may not be real, and it's just the perception's harder. Like to me, it seems like there's more of like a filter that's on it that you're having to kind of go through. Personally, I don't know.
And also, it is a transcendence aspect. So with shape shifting and Neptune, I used to think that mutable signs are magic ability and cardinal signs are psychic ability. And then I realized Neptune is psychic ability. All the clairs, psychic intuition, and I love Neptune now.
But I think of like Neptune retrograde also is like, it's distorted. It's like distortion, right? Like this distortion of what you hear, what's been said. Like, am I hearing things? Am I not hearing things? Did I hear that right?
You can hear stuff when it didn't happen at that time, and then it's like outside of time and space.
Because it still has a mutable energy,
right?
Because it's associated with Pisces. Well, Jupiter and Neptune, but but still very mutable when you think about it. So there can be this kind of like getting lost in how something sounds, or on the flip side also of Neptune is just the complete undoing or the inability to show up, or finding it harder to be assertive or to there's like a lot of self-undoing that can come with
and sabotage.
Yes, yeah.
I have that trine in my Venus, and
Neptune trine Venus is nice though.
it's dreamy.
Yeah, and when it's in an Earth sign, it's a lot more practical.
Actually, this is what enables me to make out with my pillow, because like I will connect. I know it's crazy, right? Whether it's in the 12th and then, like the physical conduit. Like there's certain people who have like their sun on Neptune. I'll directly connect on my Neptune.
Yeah.
And it'll literally feel like I'm connecting to them through a physical medium. They're probably not aware of it, but it's like,
oh, those
I
Capricorns.
can feel you, because I have my moon there too. So it's
Yeah,
like, I can feel you. Oh my gosh. And it's very dreamy, and the synchronicities are crazy. And Neptune is a fucking troll. Like it's crazy. Like when you're thinking about something, you see the word, and it's like, are you fucking with me? And Neptune's like, I'm fucking with you. And, you know, so it is what it is. Like I won't even deny it or like be ashamed anymore, because now this is just fascinating. But yeah, especially in Capricorn, you see literal signs. Your body guides itself, and I mean, and through all the signs and generations. But I wanted to share that because it's fucking delusional. Like it's crazy as fuck, and it's able to like actually utilize that.
Neptune's crazy enough as it is, though. I mean, just regardless if it's direct or not, there's enough issues. Just Neptune as it is, not aspected or even
retrograde or direct.
Yeah.
It's just like ugh, but, in a good way though. But like, because once again, like I've come to respect it as psychic ability and all the supernatural experiences and paranormal phenomena. So, I mean, how do you reevaluate something that's metaphysical to you?
Saturn.
Oh. There we go. And Mercury and Virgo. So, but anytime I always say how, the answer is always Virgo. But like Saturn is how you control and utilize it. That's it.
And I like a good Saturn-Neptune conjunction.
Oh,
I feel like that can balance it out really nicely, regardless of the sign. And I also, I don't know, I've got like, it's so weird. I've got Neptune currently. It's been in a trine for a while to like my Sun and my Mercury, and I will straight up hear things.
Right.
And I know, like, I'm crazy, but I'm not that crazy. But I will straight up fucking hear some shit, especially
clairaudiently, right?
When there's a lot of wind.
Ooh.
It's weird. When there's a lot of wind.
Do you have Mercury Libra?
I'm Mercury and Scorpio.
Mercury Scorpio.
Yeah, it's conjunct Pluto. So it's very strange, because the Neptune trine has been to my Jupiter, to my Sun, to my Mercury, and I will straight up hear voices when it's really windy. And I'll be like, oh my God, like, please, not today, Jesus. Like, and I just like will hear stuff. It's weird. I'll hear stuff all the time, or I'll hear voices of people, and I'll hear little bits and pieces of things, sometimes during readings, so I might be like the clairaudience, but even like I'll hear like little bits of a conversation, and then like later that day I'll have a conversation with somebody and they'll say the same thing. And it's very weird.
The issue with Neptune, and I love that you said that, because when people explain Neptunian phenomenon, they try and analyze it with the Virgo lens. So like you can't break down.
No, you can't.
Right, like you can't look at it literally and be like, oh well, that you were just hearing wind. Yeah, she was hearing wind, but like there's a metaphysical phenomena that's it's induced by imagination. It's opposite Virgo, just by that basis.
Plain.
So if you said it's pseudoscientific, technically it's not wrong, but that doesn't make it any less psychic.
It's just weird also, because when you think when you think about it, like Neptune does rule ghosts. Did you know that?
Yeah, Neptune.
Ghosts and phantom
metaphysical
noises.
Phenomena that's not physically.
It's not Pluto.
Real,
it's not Mercury. It's Neptune. So I mean, so much weird fucking paranormal shit has happened for me. Like
Neptune
since
is
having
the
that
astral
transit.
realm, right? The astral
it's the astral, yeah. Which is weird, because I've had like a lot of like. I have a lot of precognitive dreams, especially since the transit. I've always had them, but they've been really strong since the transit. The node squaring Neptune has really kind of highlighted that for me. And
In fact, my progressed moon is sextile my natal Neptune.
Yeah.
And I've been more clairaudient. I've been more claircognizant. I've just been very in tune. It's just been very because of the fog of Pisces. I don't know what it feels like someone's behind a veil just talking shit.
The trine,
like,
though,
where you at, bitch?
The trine that's been happening to like my Mercury and my Pluto has been straight up fucking wild. Like before I left LA, I was living in a really old house in East Hollywood, and I had like it was like a small house, and there was like a window here in my kitchen living room where I could look out when I was in the kitchen, and then there was like a front window. And middle of the day, I'm in the kitchen and I'm like doing dishes, and I had a gate that has like a padlock on it, and I always have it locked so people wouldn't come in during the daytime. The middle of the day, probably 1 in the afternoon, I'm doing dishes, and I look up and I see a woman walking past one of the windows, like from the gate, like to my front door, and she's got like long hair, and like it was the middle of the fucking day. It makes my hair stand up just thinking about it. Wearing like a long nightie, and I see this woman walk from the gate and then like walk to the front door, and I'm like, how did this woman get into my courtyard? And I open the door and she's fucking gone. Wow. Vanished. Like there's no way she could have gone anywhere because the window to the window of the door.
You were progressed in a Sagittarius then, right?
Yes.
Because that Sagittarius is the ability to see into the unseen visually. Because you're actually like, I don't know exactly how that works physically, but like, with that square to Pisces.
My progressed Mercury is also conjunct Neptune right now.
I noticed that. Like,
yeah, it's fucking weird. Like I can tell when there is stuff around.
And you know, all these Neptune Pisces kids, I feel like really teach humanity how to embrace the metaphysical.
Next year especially.
Oh yeah, with Jupiter.
Oh my god, the Neptune Jupiter babies.
Yeah.
That's so magical.
Sun, Neptune, Jupiter too. In Pisces, that baby,
yeah.
whoever, and those babies were, if you had a baby Gemini, if you got pregnant Gemini season, you're giving birth to those babies.
Those are going to be some magical babies. They're going to be like little boaties.
Yep, Lil Boat. And shout out to Lil Yachty. And other than that, Pluto retrograde, I've heard in the natal chart, when you have Pluto retrograde, you come into this lifetime with all the superpowers you had versus the direct where you're going to have to awaken it through the lifetime.
Or paying the price for doing some naughty deeds in a past life.
Yeah.
The internal power, the awakening of the internal power, internal even rage, fear.
Would you say Pluto retrograde makes those susceptible more to like being molested or raped than the direct? I think that's a reach to say because it could happen for both. But would the direct recognize it more than the retrograde?
You want to take into consideration the placement, the sign of the sign and the placement of Pluto. Like I've seen a lot of people who have dealt with like definitely like a lot of sexual abuse stemming from the Pluto and Scorpio generation. Right. But that was the peak also of like porn and like all kinds of things that were really starting to get big in like mainstream time in like the early 90s and going to the 2000s. But also like the Pluto in Virgo and Uranus in Virgo, those aspects, the oppositions that they had from Saturn. I think that was the late 60s. I mean, that can be really anybody when you think about it. But I see kind of like Pluto retrograde as like sometimes I've seen it as like stunted power. Like the power is always there, right? It's always there. Like evolutionary astrology says
latent?
Pluto is your soul, versus other astrologers kind of look at it as like your pain or like your wound. So if it's retrograde, are you dealing with untimely, unpleasant deaths, tragic situations, torture, things like that happen in a past life that you're still dealing with that trauma?
And these untimely deaths don't have to be severe too. In some cases, they could be like your toy broke untimely or something like that. But would you also say like the retrograde, like the direct person will know they're getting taken advantage of, whereas the retrograde may not even know how to process it? They might be like, oh, well, that person was just treating
I think the direct person is going to see it a lot more clearly. Like when you think about Pluto, right, especially if you have a strong Pluto, you can spot the scam. You can see the drug deal going on in the corner. Like I
have a retrograde Pluto. I'm naive. Right, and I'm sure other retrograde Plutos can spot it. So it's not like black and white, but I really resonate with that.
Yeah, but like the direct is also knowing that sometimes like they are in power. Like one thing that I've seen a lot of that just random, but Pluto retrograde in the second house. I've seen that oftentimes is people who can generate wealth. They can bring in more of it, but they will always find themselves in a situation of, bringing in only what they need, not excess sometimes, depending on the aspects. So that's an interesting thought when you think about it, because Pluto in the second can be like this regeneration of wealth and also like abundance in this lifetime, like stability, especially financially. But if it's retrograde, it's still reckoning and dealing with the powers of self-worth and whether or not like they're getting enough and if like they're abusing it. So retrograde Pluto can sometimes find themselves in a situation, I think, where it's like really always constantly dealing with that devil on the shoulder. And are they overcoming and like letting go of their obsessions or their fixations or what has overtaken them maybe in a past life?
That's deep.
Yeah.
I got that opposite Venus too. And every time I show love, there's just like
they
this,
get crazier and crazier.
Well, there's that, and then there's the Pluto like vibe that's just like, fuck you, how dare you open your heart. But not like from me. It just feels like a social opposition that's kind of like triggering insecurity, which is really just a subconscious reflection of me. But other than that,
Pluto aspects are my favorite though. I'm glad we finished with that.
Yeah. I've slept on them. Like the more I get older, the more I really appreciate it. In fact, Pluto is retrograding over my Saturn, finally forever. So that's me kind of getting ready to awaken fully, and I'm here for it.
It's so interesting how you're dealing with that now. I think about that transit. I had that a long time ago. So to have that in conjunction with your Saturn return, I'm surprised you're still alive. I'm glad you made it.
I almost got in a car accident. So, I mean, I got in a car accident, and thankfully I didn't die. So there's that.
Well, hopefully, guys, this is helpful for you, shining a little bit of a light on what retrograde planets might mean in the birth chart. Let us know what planets do have retrograde. How has it affected you? We appreciate your likes, your comments, your shares. Check out our links below. Be sure to subscribe and check out our subscription tiers that we have if you want to support the channel. Check out our community tab also. We're always looking and trying to get more ideas for content. So if there's something you want us to make a show on, let us know.
Y'all stay blessed as always. And, oh, what's that? Oh, you haven't joined the membership. Well, there's that join button there. You have no excuse, really. I mean, you've probably bought double cheeseburger meals or vegan meals that are more than this. And this is an ultimate meal right here. You're eating soul food, so.
Catch us soon. We'll see all of you guys very soon. You guys take care.